Hey folks, Steve here with a special Axis Empires video for you today. This video is going to be my initial impressions on the game and what I've experienced so far in the training scenarios. Now, understanding that the training scenarios were just that, it's not the full experience. Um, it's not the same experience I would get if I were even playing Dicenso, if I were playing the full campaign. So that's why it's initial. It's just initial impressions, not a review. I don't even know if you can. I mean, can you really review a game like this? This is one of those tough things. Like I've not. I don't think I've done a review of World in Flames. Have I? I don't think I have. Because it's just such a. It's a big experience, and it's kind of hard. You can say like all of this works well for what it's doing. But is it right for any particular person? That gets harder because these particular games are so tricky. There are a commitment. Tend to be a lot of rules, and you need to spend a lot of time playing. So let's I guess let's start by saying that there is a video that maybe is the prequel to this, which was if you go look on the channel 4 months ago, I did a video called like Strategic World War II Commentary. And if you go watch that video, I was sort of making some really broad comparisons from a game that I'm used to playing, which is World in Flames, and what I could sort of discern from Axis Empires, having only been reading the rules and looking through the material and the components, and just kind of calling out things that I felt would probably be a challenge for me to deal with, or um, you know, I would even say I was maybe starting to sound a bit pessimistic about the whole thing. And I mean, I think at some point I'm going to do a proper, part two video, but that may be further along. Um, if you watch that, and I think it is worth watching. I mean, okay, I'm going to advertise my own videos, but it's worth listening to because I think like I had a formulated we'll say a very ephemeral preliminary opinion or a set of expectations, and then also having all of that aligned against my experience with World in Flames coming into these training scenarios. So um, that might help, be a good comparison in terms of what I say here versus what I said 4 months ago. Anyway, you're watching this video. I would say very generally that my opinions around the game and the system have warmed, meaning a better outlook on the system, having actually gotten to playing it and experiencing it and kind of seeing how all the things come together, the mechanics, the components. Um, I think I do enjoy it, so I'll say that much. I like it, having gotten the ball rolling, and I think it took me until the Barbarossa scenario to really like, okay, I'm playing it. It I see kind of where things are coming together. Um, I'm having more fun. I think the Poland scenario, the puzzle of it and figuring that out was a bit strange, and I think this is probably one of the better things. And I know people say this already, so I'm not saying anything special here. Um, I will give a lot of praise to the training scenarios, just the way that they're structured, because I do feel like with the Poland scenario, like it's going to introduce you to some weird things if you're not used to the way that the game handles it. Again, I'm coming in as somebody who plays World in Flames a lot, so that Poland scenario was like, hey, time to shatter your understanding of how hex and counter operational stuff is going to work at this level, because it's just a different system. Here's this different system. Get used to this different system. Hey, look what you can do. You can force units to retreat through cities sometimes, not all the time, sometimes, um, depending on circumstances and HQs and this, that, and the other thing, and fortress units, which I guess we didn't have fortress units in the Polish campaign, but um, just getting a feel for those basic mechanics, I think the first training studio does a pretty good job of just saying like, hey, here things are different, right? Like you need to kind of understand how they're different and how to act accordingly because they're different, maybe different than what you expect. If this was your first war game, then that first scenario would probably either be much easier to comprehend because you don't have any pre-existing notions, or you might still be confused because the way things operate, you have a hard time connecting it to, like, what does this mean? What does this represent? It did teach a good lesson on the order of attacks. So, needing, it's not just, okay, I'm going to do my attacks. It's, I kind of need to attack in a certain order to get really the thing that I want to have happen. And those are some good lessons learned. And then that kind of went into the Barbarossa scenario where um, it was interesting to kind of like really fight that out. And I mean, I'm talking about Russia now, so I'll move some stuff out of the way. Russia does feel it feels big and it feels small, I guess. I mean, it's the border of where the Barbarossa campaign started to Moscow isn't really that far away. It doesn't feel super far away, um, but still getting there was tough. Um, and the interplay of the cards, I think that trading scenario, like it was good because it blew things out a bit. We had to think a lot harder about um, allocating our resources at the right time. So we started to see where the timing of the support markers was important, when does what and how, and learning that shell game of who, am I going to let you do this and then save my stuff for later? Or am I going to try to stop you here, but you have more support markers anyway? So, you're just going to run roughshod with your capability, that kind of stuff, kind of fitting in. Granted, I had a lot of trouble actually getting the rules right in that scenario, but that's more on me than I think the system. And I appreciate all the help from all the folks that have been sticking with this series so far and helping me. That's been a huge help as well. So thank you guys again. Um, and so I think the Barbarossa scenario was very helpful, just to let the game breathe a little bit, because I think again in Poland things are just so tight, and you have to try to do a very specific thing, and that very specific thing, you really need to fine tune your movements and attacks. Barbarossa gives you a lot more, you've got latitude to work with, so you can just let's start attacking, let's start seeing what happens. um, how can I use building up or breaking down units to do the types of things that I feel like I need to be able to do. Um, and that felt, good to kind of learn the broader nuances of things in a bigger context, and seeing where um, your HQs may or may not want to be involved and help defend. It just depends on the situation, and that's interesting too. That it's not just using an HQ all the time um, is optimal. I would say, like in World in Flames, using an HQ. If you can use an HQ and it's that important of a combat, there's no reason not to. I guess that's one way to look at it, other than opportunity cost for using that HQ for other things. In this game, HQs are really important, but they have a very narrow set of functions that they perform. And in some cases, applying HQ support could be not what you really want to do. You might want your units to be able to retreat. You might be more interested in getting out of the way. Even if you're giving up what could be an important hex, maybe you need to do that. And so that was kind of a good learning experience. And then obviously the one we just wrapped up, the Fall of France, you could start to see a little bit more of the strategic context when we included Narvik, of just, we have to kind of make a strategic decision, like how important is northern Norway in the form of Narvik? How important is it? I mean, grabbing Oslo, we ought to try to do that, and we were able to do that very cleanly. But Narvik added this other complex element to the game of do we bother, and where does that hurt us? And it's that resource allocation bit that really is important in strategic games, because that's really, if you're at whatever level you are simulating what is happening on the board, it's like a policy decision. Like, what's our war plan? Are we going to take away resources from this critical front to go do this other thing? Is it worthwhile to do that? So it's good. that's present in the game, and it has a way to illustrate the importance of that. It does do it in a way, and it's like I'm talking about the training scenarios. I want to kind of give some broad pros and cons to the system here in a second. I would say it does it in a way that at times feels it's good and it's bad at the same time, and the bad's not even really that bad. I just need to articulate that better here in a few minutes. Um, but the training scenario for Fall of France, albeit being chronologically before the Barbarossa thing, does work well as the third training scenario because it gets you back into a tighter focused campaign where each movement is really important. Speed is really a factor, and then you start to see the political stuff like, oh, how do you get Italy? Well, you get Italy in a very specific set of circumstances, and even understanding that there's less effective ways to declare war on miners, and there's more effective ways depending on what you're doing, the way that weather affects everything. Um, and so by the end of the training scenarios, right, these three training scenarios, technically there's another one for Daisenso, but I think it's a very different scoped training scenario. I feel pretty good about understanding the game and its systems. And I'll say, like, the first time I set out these maps out here, right, I'm seeing, C zone stuff. I'm seeing the boxes over here, and there's delay DRMs over there, and up here there's, well, the turn track, but there's a bunch of other stuff, and the stuff up there, totally confusing. I don't know what the posture display does, and we haven't really used the posture display, not really yet, but I think I get it enough having to have read through those rules to a degree where pretty much everything on the map now after those three training centers, like, oh no, I get it. I think there's a few things I don't fully comprehend that I need to, um, I still need to understand a bit better when the cards start to matter. There are things in the system where the cards kind of have an effect, and you're not sure whether or not something's going to become important unless the card's going to help something along. I'll put it that way. Um, so I do think a really strong part of this package of Axis Empires Ultimate Edition are these training scenarios. I think they do a really good job, no matter how tough that training is, no matter how hard it is to, for me, get my brain out of World in Flames mode and into Axis Empires mode. I think it does a fantastic job, and I can't think of a better game that does it this way at the strategic level. World in Flames really doesn't quite have this sort of training class set of modules. It has smaller modules, and they're great and all. But Axis Empires obviously does this much better. Of course, Axis Empires is a different game that's generally faster to set up and has less counters. So I'm not, what does a World in Flames version of all this even look like? And I think somebody could definitely create a World in Flames training package like this. It's not in the game today in the same way that this is in Axis Empires. And people will say, well, a World at War has some sort of like way to ramp up as well. But believe me, I've looked at that, and boy, I always kick a World at War when I bring it up. But this, I think this is actually really a best in class kind of thing for trying to learn the specific system. It does it pretty well. It does it when you actually play the scenarios back to back. Each one is layering on just enough new stuff while utilizing the stuff you've already just learned, that it's a really good like growth in your understanding of the system and capability to play it, which is really good. I mean, that's really great. And I can even say, like, right now, at the end of all this, like, I know how to play Axis Empires. Like, I feel pretty like if somebody said, hey, we're gonna go play Axis Empires at some convention, and I'd have the free schedule to do it, I'd be like, yeah, I can do that. I would want to do that even, right? I sign me up. Let's do this. I know how to play. And that's really good. I think that's sort of like, man, what if I got to the end of this training scenario and I still felt like I didn't understand the way that the game works? but I do understand the way that the game works. Um, so that's goodness. So let's talk about this. I'm going to talk about pros and cons, goods and bads. Um, and I promise the cons and bads aren't going to be as harsh as you might imagine they could be. So let's hit those first. I feel like that's a better way to do it. Let's talk about the things that I might be critical of, and then we can talk about the good stuff. I think that's fair. Um, so the cons, and this is just in the system, embedded in the system itself, are these very strange ways that ideas are conveyed. It's smart. There are smart things in the way that the game conveys the things that it does, but it's something like you really have to adopt this mindset of this is abstracted to a degree where it doesn't even feel um, like a lot of things are unsaid, right? Things are important, but they're important for reasons that are unsaid. You can draw the line that indicates why it's important or what it represents, but the game doesn't do a great job of kind of articulating that for you. And so I'll relate this to the Norway thing. Like, why historically did the Germans have to get into Norway? Wasn't I mean, there were multiple reasons. Okay, multiple reasons. Some of it is, yeah, it's a source of additional resources. It helps protect the northern flank of the Axis powers in World War II. And then the other piece of it is the British looking at mining the Norwegian coast and creating problems for German shipping in the area. So, games can represent that a number of ways. World in Flames in the current edition, if the British have the option to mining the Norwegian coast, and doing so is some risk, and you have to weigh that risk and make a decision. And then the Germans will want to attack into Norway to resolve those issues and to clear the mines. And so there's sort of multiple reasons to do that. Um, and if the British don't mine the Norwegian coast, the Germans only have to worry about what if the Allies attack Norway themselves, and that's a possibility too. But at the end of the game, the Germans would get credit for the objective hex in Norway because it's nearest to Berlin, and so that like there's a way to represent that. In this game, Oslo is a green strategic hex, meaning we ought to take it because we get victory points for it. That's kind of the same thing as like the objective hex in um, War and Flame system. But besides that, uh, is there like a real good reason to get Norway? It's abstracted into the strategic hexes, and of course there's the Narvik gray one up there that the Axis don't want to lose. So there are reasons to go into Norway, but those reasons almost entirely depend upon um, uh, the the strategic hexes, and then possibly having a naval base on the Arctic coast. So I guess that's the other reasons, other strategic reason. So like the idea that Norway is important to some degree, and that like there's a reason for operations to occur in Norway, exists in both systems, but in Norway with Axis empires, like that reason is kind of abstracted so much that it just feels a bit different, right? And you could, I think, see some situations where uh, you might be trying to argue like, well, do I need to go? Do I need to go into Norway? Maybe or maybe not. What's the hard driver, if anything, if nothing else? And that's a bit different for me. The other thing that I have a hard time a little bit with is the way that the game uses certain phrasing in the way it conveys information. That sounds so weird. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not explaining it well. So the rule books don't have an index, and so I have found in some cases when I really wanted to understand what is this counter doing, what am I trying, like what is this? Why do I even care between this marker and another marker? I'm going to the rulebook PDFs and I'm doing Control F and I'm just searching for the term. Like, where do they talk about this? Like, where is this? What is this? So I can try to get a better understanding of like where what the heck is going on. The example of that would be some of the markers that are. I'll just show this one on camera here. The mobilizing marker versus the is it yeah free passage on the back. So when you read free passage on the counter, you go, okay, I think I understand what that could mean. And you look in the rule book, and it talks about how, um, like, what the rules explicitly say is that activated minor countries units can't leave or attack out of the minor country. And that's all it really says. And so, yeah, you look at it, and I had to piece it together, which, okay, that's not a hard thing to do, Steve. Deal with it. But there was like a minute there. I'm like, well, they clearly don't have free passage, right? They have to stay in their home country, and understanding like how it's supposed to operate in the game terms is your major power, like Germany, if you were activating a minor country with just the free passage, all it really means is your major power has free passage through the minor country, and that those minor country units aren't really helping you in the war effort. They're just allowing you free passage, not that marker is free passage for you, not the minor country itself. And that just represents powers that are like, hey, yeah, okay, you can move on through, but I don't want to. We're not ready to go to war. And then mobilizing is the difference between mobilizing and free passages. Mobilizing means that they are working on building up, and they get an extra set of steps to put onto the board, or flipping one-step units to two-step units, and then eventually they may be able to leave their country at some point. But it took a minute to try to really understand. Like, okay, you can't. The what I think the system has a little trouble with is it can tell you about the lookup rules. It has markers, look up the markers. It tells you the game effect of it in a very granular, like zoomed in way. But sometimes it feels like that idea of what this represents is not being conveyed at a higher level as well as it could have, um, so that you could like understand the whole thing in context. And that would maybe just have meant that there's an increased rulebook size because Tom or someone has to be putting little designer notes like, hey, Steve, you dum dum, this is what that means, because I need that help apparently. Um, but I just had to understand it a bit better, and it took a little bit longer than I would have thought I needed to go, oh, okay, I get it. This is what that will mean when I activate this minor country. For me, for my power, I have free passage. They have to stay in their minor country. Okay. The other thing then is what could be the con is just that the cards um, bake a lot of things into them where it makes it really hard to appreciate any sort of rules that you're looking up to try to learn, like, how does this happen. Like, you can think about particular invasions, right? So before fall of France, if you're just trying to work your way through things, like, you could look up case yellow. Okay, great. If you were reading through the rule book and you were like, hey, wait a minute, Italy isn't pro axis, Italy doesn't have, like, Italy's not in any of the scenarios until 1941. How does Italy come in? Like, Italy is a fascist axis power in World War II games, right? Like, where is Italy at? How do you even get to Italy? Well, the way you would get it, right, is it has a lot to do with the case yellow card, but you have to go look at the card, and you have to see everything in context to start to see the picture of when and how Italy comes in. And it's not like there's a clear, like, point to point line drawn of saying, oh, this is how I would do it, or this is how I align that power. I really have to use these mechanics in the game, and figure out, like, uncover the mystery of how a particular set of actions that maybe historically occurred actually occurred. Um, which, I don't know. That doesn't even sound like a bad thing, does it? That maybe I'm being overly harsh here. Just that, like, you really have to kind of peel back the layers and try to understand things that maybe in some other games it's just more either more straightforward, or it's like it's much clearer how to do something. Here, the interplay of the cards and the mechanics means you really kind of have to understand the cards and looking ahead at all the cards and making sense of all of that. So maybe not really a bad thing, but it's something that feels a bit different to have to deal with. I also will say that it makes it so that when we talk about things like going to war in the posture display, the posture display is that interesting little mechanic of like, okay, if there's a marker here, you're in some kind of posture truce agreement with the Axis and you're not at war. And when those markers go away, now you're at war. Um, that's kind of a neat, abstract, kind of like backwards way to do it, other than just saying like, "Hey, we declare war," um, and I'm used to just saying that, like, "Hey, we're declaring war on this power. Like, it's time. We're going to do it." Um, and maybe that's and usually I'll say it's just the Axis choosing to do that. The Allies will tend not to want to declare war themselves. Um, on like at the beginning of say World in Flames, they have to declare war on Germany after Germany declares war on Poland, whatever. Um, Here, uh, or in World in Flames, the Allies don't just wantonly declare war on people because that affects U.S. entry, and there's this whole U.S. entry, feature set that you kind of role play as the United States to influence the game leading up to entry in the war, and then you enter the war. Um, Based on what I see in the game, while we've not really experienced it yet, like the U.S. is going to come in during Total War, and there's a few tracks related to their effect as they ramp up entry into the war and all of that. Um, but that kind of like higher level political consideration instead of political actions that have an impact consequence on U.S. entry is just not quite here the same way. Um, and war between the major powers is highly dependent on that posture display, which just adds this additional layer of kind of obfuscation to the game. If you're just learning it, you're like, well, we're going to be at war, right? And the training scenarios take care of that for you. In the campaign game, it feels like you kind of have to learn how to get through that, and that's its own weird little mini puzzle to solve as well. And I worry that that's just did it have to be this kind of other system of handling it? I don't know. All right, that's a lot of cons, and they're not too bad either. I don't think. See if there's any other ones. Probably the last thing I would say is just a con or a tricky thing is the strategic warfare stuff. I had mentioned this in my other commentary video about World War II games that having things go to the delay box is kind of interesting. You need to figure like, oh well, we don't know when we're going to get that unit back. Could be a while. And then you have the delay DRMs that are representative of like the strategic situation. So German subs, right? We're going to use German subs, and what does that do? Well, um, it'll affect the Allied delay DRMs, meaning that the Allies will get their units later. It will take longer to get their support markers back over time. The Allies similarly could do things to the Germans, bombing and all that. That would delay the return of support markers and all of that. And you can kind of say like, oh well, the strategic bombing stuff that may be occurring, that's affecting production and it's affecting delay DRMs, but it doesn't necessarily have any effect on um, a lot of units on the board much of the time. So if the card says you're getting 6 steps of this, that, or the other, you're getting 6 steps of this, that, or the other. We're almost no regard so far that I've seen from delay DRMs. Now the exception, of course, is that these multi-step units for the Germans, if they're destroyed, they go to the delay box. And if you're eating crap on the delay die rolls or you have really bad DRMs, then you're going to be stuck with the Germans only being able to operate in core form, which is not an efficient way to stack. And so there's a little bit of an impact there, but it just feels, I guess I still am a little put off by the way that the strategic model is there. Like strategic warfare is there. it's there in marker form, and you don't really engage much with it. So for a strategic game, you are making strategic decisions about allocation of resources, which is good, but the actual, like, I don't know, playing of the strategic elements really is not there. And that's by design and that's intentional, but it feels a bit different. So, like, um, in World in Flames, if you're playing as the Commonwealth, as the British, you you are petrified of having your convoy pipelines disrupted by German U-boats. Like, you are actively allocating your resources, actively positioning, watching for enemy movements, and trying to respond to threats to keep British shipping going, so the British can keep building things that they need to build to stay alive and do the whole thing. And it can be very tense. It's very stressful to manage that, but you do have to actively manage that in World of Warcraft. In this game, it just comes down to, placing markers and maybe contesting them. And there's not much gameplay there in terms of like actually affecting the strategic warfare situation, and that feels like a little bit of a bummer. Now, um, I could be playing with Schiffskrieg, and I probably will at some point. Um, and some of that's going to get a little bit better, but the fact that you can't really use your Schiffskrieg more granular units without the support markers most of the time, I think, is how that's going to work. And the fact that, for much of it, it's just like, I don't know, maybe that's the detail I need. Maybe I'll just cut that short and say maybe I need to do the Battle of the Atlantic in Schiffskrieg and see if it scratches the appropriate itch there. But in other games, it's a constant concern. It's a constant thing you're worried about. What you're going to do, how you're going to do it. Do you have enough convoys? Do you have enough shipping? Do you need to get more escorts out there in the water? And like it's a constant struggle, and it keeps you busy. Um, Here, you get speed in the game by not having to worry about that. And you're just really playing markers, but at the same time, it's like a marker versus a marker, and they go away to the delay box. Like, just all right, you blocked me, there it goes. And that it's not as fulfilling maybe as the more granular treatment, and we'll have to see if Schiff's Creek can satisfy that crunch desire. Okay, all right, guys. I talked a lot about cons. I talked about cons. Um, how about the good stuff? How about the good stuff? Let's start with stuff that I maybe mentioned with the unboxing video. The components are out of this world, man. They're really good. I mean, the player aid charts, the um, just like this extra support unit convoy marker chart is really good. Like, it's dense with helpful information that actually helps at the table when you're like, okay, what can I do right now? Let me check my options. Let me see what this does. Um, is pretty darn good. The counters, I like the counter art and the counter colors. They're all very clear. They look nice. The map is nice, and things are all pretty relatively clear in the way it's organized, and the information is how the information is conveyed. The choice, even in the text of the rule books, to underscore and highlight or bold terms, so like, hey, if you're not sure about what that means, it's in the glossary, right? It's not an index, but the glossary is there, and the glossary is really helpful to vet, like, oh, right, this applies to this thing. What is this thing again? All right, that's the definition of the thing. All right, all right. So I do think, yes, the rule book is a good rule book. I think it besides not having an index, and I always love designer notes. I want more. I want as many designer notes as the game can possibly have. But the rule book is pretty solid, and it conveys information reasonably well, all accepting again some of the context of the rules. But explaining the mechanics, it does that in a clear in pretty good manner. Again, the cards are all very nice in terms of like the material, the components. Like, if nothing else, the components are super great. I mean, this really is. I mean, just awesome. It's just a very nice package to have laid out at the table, and it looks good mid progress of any campaign and seeing where the units are, and just it looks really good. That's a bit of a shallow thing to talk about as a good thing, but it should be noted. Like they really did do a good job with this, and the counter quality is all nice. I don't even think I'm going to clip these counters. I think they're just fine without clipping, and they feel good. The game operates well with that. The fact that yeah, you don't have gigantic stacks, and the way that the mechanics are executed here is quite nice. So it's like, hey, I know I'm only going to stack up to 3 units. I do need to think about the efficiencies of stacking. Um, so now let me get away from the aesthetic stuff and talk about real stuff for a second. Real stuff. Uh, the cool thing that I do like this idea that single step units are core, even though I don't think the game really says that. Um, but if they're supposed to be core, then great. They're core, and you can build them up, and so you get better stacking efficiency, and so you kind of the fact that there's it's not quite like an OCS mode, but the idea like in some circumstances we're going to build up our units, we're going to squeeze those extra bits of attack power by concentrating our strength and the stacking efficiency so that we have more attack factors coming through a particular hex side for combat. We're going to put all that together. Um, is interesting. And then in other circumstances, you might need to break those units down, and you need to think about how and when you're going to do that. And then maybe you're using that breakdown capability to be more flexible to spread out and surround the enemy, or get more units where you really need them to be before they can form up. And I do like that. I don't know. I like that bit of it. I think it's an interesting process, and it helps again to keep the counter density under control. But there's a meaningful game reason to do it. I like that quite a bit. I think that's a cool part of the system. Um, and I like when you can do the different combinations, looking at the recipes and going, oh, okay, well if I just get my 2 armor steps here with that infantry, then I can get my Panzer army out, and that's going to be really good, and I can do a lot of cool stuff with that unit. I can do the overruns, and we didn't really do too many overruns at all. In fact, I don't think I've done a single overrun. Um, maybe I had some missed opportunities there, but I don't know. But it's still cool. I like that, and I like the like. Oh, you got to combine the German Mountaineer unit with a minor Axis unit to create the stronger version of the Axis Mountain unit. I like that kind of thing. I think that is very cool. It reminds me of some other games that I played that, um, in fact, I think it's like a Chadwick design where that same idea exists. Thunder in the East, and maybe some other games. I know Frank Chadwick had some. Maybe he had some part of one of the versions of Totaler Creek. I don't know. I'm running off the top of my head here. But that idea is cool. I like that a lot. I also appreciate the pressure of the cards that the game brings. This might be another one of those pro con, like it's a double edged sword. Like the cards set your production, so there is no effect. Like if we do a bunch of these things and we are really you know disrupting what would in a different war game be like economically devastating to this country, the cards kind of make it where it's like, well, not really. All accepting where you would, I guess, not be able to reinforce because you've run out of cities. I guess that's one way to do it. But it just feels kind of disconnected, right? And that is one tough thing of the game staying on the board is disconnected from production, excepting for the cards that you've played and how that plays into it. But what I do like, and I guess this is like the other side of that double-edged sword, the good part of that is it actually puts pressure on the player. Like you're going to play this card, you're going to get a set of reinforcements, or you're going to get some recurring reinforcements, or in the case of in case of the card case yellow, um, the special mechanic to declare Vichy uh, is timer based. You've got a timer, buddy. If you don't do it by this time, you're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way, and that's maybe a bigger pain in the butt to deal with. I like that. I think that's interesting, and it makes me wonder. In a campaign game, like, can let's say the Germans go west first, they do the historical path, and they're fighting the fight with the Soviet Union. Like, can they run the Soviets out of steps? I would think not, right? You would think that the huge population of the Soviet Union, like, none of those Soviet cards are going to wind up in a state where they're running out of steps. But maybe I need to see that. I need to see how that's going to work, because you could certainly figure out, like, okay, if the Soviets are generating, like, 8 steps every turn, and I'm chewing through at least 8 steps, will I get to a point where, if I've kept myself from losing very many steps, but I'm ripping them apart, their reinforcement card ends, they've got to play another card. All they're going to be left with is, like, maybe a crappy card, because they don't want to play another good card for just a short season in the fall or whatever. Um, like, can we make use of that and, like, catch them, right? Like, the feast and famine of the replacements maybe could come out in such a way where uh, you start making a lot of big gains on them, because they get into a famine card, set of cards that they kind of have to play because they don't have very many better options. They want to save a better card for the summer season or whatever they're going to do. And maybe you can make a big break in a particular season that way. I don't know if that's really how it would ever work, but I get the feeling like that's kind of something you need to keep in mind. And I do like that. I mean, that's cool. Like, it's the production is at times on a timer, and you have to decide how the production's going to go. If this were another game like World in Flames, you would really just produce, 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 produce. You're constantly producing. It's what you're choosing to produce that maybe matters. So, is the Soviet Union diverting some of its production to do more air? In which case, maybe you try to, burn through their infantry, or they're just producing nothing but infantry, 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 infantry all the time, and you're just stuck fighting through the mass of Soviet infantry units. Here, it just operates a little bit differently. So it's not a constant stream of reinforcements, like it can sometimes be in World in Flames to some point. Here, it could be a little more, I guess, blocky. Blocks of reinforcements, and whether or not you can withstand or denude the capability of those reinforcements to have um, an effect on the game. I do want to see in a broader full campaign context what that looks like, because we've only seen a few cards. We've only seen how the cards operate a little bit. And we've really not had the choice of cards. It's always been, here are the cards that the training scenarios are giving you. So having to make a choice, having to say, am I going to do this now, or am I going to do this later? And am I going to do this major branching path versus this other major branching path, like Sea Lion versus Barbarossa? What will that do for us in the long term of the game? I think I still need to experience that in the context of the system, but I do kind of get the way it all operates. So I think it's cool. It's doing things. Like, the cards are ultimately a double-edged sword to me. They do cool things, and I like some of the things that it does. It is still weird to some degree. What else good here? Oops. I would also say that um, the game, I think, I'll say that the game does seem to work, and it makes it work with the interplay of all these systems. And if I take myself out of the simulation mindset, which I think I'm tied to from World in Flames, and people can say that World in Flames is a good simulation. I don't know. But just, if I try to take the what you see is what you get mentality out of it, I think Axis Empires is doing really interesting things as a game, and how it chooses to represent historical events, or historical potentialities, that are kind of interesting, that are clever, and uh, it is very playable too. And I hate using that word because that feels so nebulous, but it is playable. Like, like, I thought about the fact that boy, I set up 3 scenarios, bang, bang, boom. It didn't take me much time to set them up. I played them. I played them relatively quickly, and I got through them. And it's like, boy, that's, when you want a strategic game, and are you going to be worried about the time investment? Like, I got through these scenarios pretty fast, all things considered. Um, and it wasn't hard to transition from one scenario to the other. So it was like, oh, okay, I'm going to set up this campaign. Oh, hey, I've got kind of got all the stuff out that I really need for that. Let me set that up. Oh, that's great. And we were able to get playing like pretty darn fast. And that's a really nice thing to have. I can't do that with World in Flames, for instance. Like World in Flames is a commitment to set up physically. Like you really need to get the force pulls out and you need to get that organized. You need to think about, you got to do scrapping. And if you don't know what that is, that's a whole thing. Before you can set up any scenario, it doesn't matter what scenario it is, there's some like really careful stepping through to go prepare the game state to play any scenario in World in Flames. It is a big, big, big commitment. Here, it was just very easy to get things set up. And it also helps that, yes, I have organized my counters by reinforcement card number, the reinforcement code. So if it's, hey, I'm playing the 23 card and I'm getting reinforcements for card 23, I can go right to the baggie that I have my 23 stuff in and boom, get them out and play them very easy. And even when I had to set up the scenario where it's mid game, 41 Barbarossa, it was really easy to kind of grab all the units that I needed. It took a little time, one by one, put this counter in this hex, but I was able to do that uh, pretty easily, and I think that's just a huge benefit. Like it is easy to get things rolling in this system. If you wanted to play it, there's not that much setup to be concerned with. That is hard to get together. You have a really easy way to piece this stuff up. And what I'm learning, even just looking at some of the 1937 or 1939 start scenario setup information, is that there's not that much on the board in 1937. Like to set up to play is super easy. There's not much out there. You just set up a handful of counters effectively for each side, and you're ready to rock and roll. And that's really cool. That's really strong that you can just get playing very, very quickly. And if you have your stuff organized like I do, then as new stuff comes in, it's just really easy to grab what you need. It gets added and you move on. That's super great. I think that's really good. Um, and I think the worst would be if you were having to play, like if you were for some reason deciding to play 1944 and you have to get like all these counters out of all the bags because you're that deep into the game and you have to set up a bunch of stuff in very particular places, that could be a chore. And I'm sure Schiff's Creek makes things a little bit more complicated than with all of that. But just the base game, like, boy, you could get up and running to play the game pretty quick. Like you said, hey, we got to set up this scenario. I mean, if you had 2 people, boom, you knock that out in quick order. It wouldn't take much time at all. And I think that's a huge benefit to this game. I think that's a huge advantage. Um, let's see. There's a couple other things I want to articulate. Let me think this through before I say it. So that besides the at-large support marker stuff, where you could in theory use an air marker uh, maybe all the way in North Africa or all the way at the gates of Moscow, and it's just at large. Understanding that like those nuances, those abstractions, however you want to look at it, of support markers kind of being available anywhere and everywhere. You have supply so long as you have an air base or a naval base, that sort of thing. Understanding that that can probably be resolved with Schiff's Krieg, and I haven't played that yet, so I have to kind of, yeah, I got to be careful because I could get burned if I play that and find it has issues, but I would suspect it will be just fine. That whatever issues I could come up with for this series, this system, however you want to look at it, I think has mitigations, in the box. I think Schiff's Krieg can hit certain notes that I would be looking for that may increase playtime, but it gets just a little bit more in line with the types of counter interactions. Um, that I might prefer. So understanding all of that together, I think this package is doing a couple of things for me. I feel the more that I'm playing it, the more I'm just genuinely enjoying it and able to appreciate the game's uh, the good aspects of the game, and I can kind of mitigate or I can rationalize the things that maybe I don't like as much or I prefer a different way, so long as the game is delivering a fun experience. And so far, I've had fun with this. So I think here's what I think the big, maybe this is like bottom line up front. I should have put this at the beginning of the video. I don't know. But to try to reach some kind of conclusion around this, because this video is getting pretty long. So far, I can say that Axis Empires is delivering a pretty solid package of a game, and it in play is fun, and it introduces interesting decisions for the players to do. Solitaire, it's a little tricky, and I have to make accommodations for that, but I have to do that for every war game that I play solitaire. And I'm sure it's quite a lot of fun played opposed, and I actually really look forward to maybe getting a chance to play with Thomas Prowl himself. Tom, we got to talk. Or play at a convention that this could be played at. So much so, I think this is already feeling like a very appropriate alternative to have in my game collection from World and Flames. And I had mentioned this, even in my strategic commentary video, like, World and Flames is World and Flames. It really is like that's to me this kind of pinnacle thing, but it comes at a tremendous cost of time and space and effort. And at times, World in Flames is so massive, and the complexities that you can achieve in it, the fidelity level of things you can achieve is great, but it is overwhelming at times, even for someone who plays it regularly like me. It can be very, very intensive and taxing on you to play. I feel like this Axis Empires is the alternative to say, I do want to do World War II, but I kind of want to handle it at a different level. And we give up some things to do that, but we get other things instead. And it's easier to set up and just play to some logical either stopping point in a campaign, or you even if you're going to still be playing over a series of maybe weeks or days or whatever, um, you're not going to have to invest as much time. So it's just nice if you can't sustain a World in Flames campaign, or you just, for me, like I just want to play something in the same vein, but without the all the crunch that's going to come with that. I think Axis Empires is hitting a really nice little spot to latch onto. Um, so much so that I think this is really helping me to see how badly I need to sell my copy of A World at War. um, which is very funny because I have a very good friend uh, who has these three games, and uh, he's somebody I played World in Flames with early on. He prefers A World at War, and he thinks Axis Empires is his second favorite, and World in Flames is his third favorite for this sort of grand strategic World War II experience. And I'm finding that my consideration is kind of the inverse. I like World in Flames the most. It does all these things that I like. I see Axis Empires being a very good game to have, because it can give a different experience at a different footprint. Well, maybe not footprint in terms of map and components, but in time, time and complexity. Uh, and that's leaving A World at War in last place. And for me, I'm sure I could maybe find some other strategic level World War II games that I like more than A World at War, even besides these other two. Um, so I've been holding on to A World at War for a long time, just figuring out like, do I keep this? Is this an alternative to WIF that I'm going to hold on to? But having gone through all this Axis Empire stuff so far, I'm thinking, well, anything I could want from A World at War, I think Axis Empires is doing, and is probably doing better, because I can actually process the rules and I can execute the game and I can have some fun with it. Where I really find A World at War to be a bit of a mess, in terms of rules and trying to make that game work. Um, and so, if nothing else, this is signaling to me that I've got my two flavors of strategic World War II. I have, the big complex thing, and then I've got my alternative when I need a little strategic World War II, but I just don't have the commitment to do World in Flames. This is something that delivers a fun experience as an alternative. Now, I still need to play more of Axis Empires, and I will. I do want to play the Great Crusade. I may want to dabble in some Dicenso stuff because I need to see that part of the game as well. But from an initial impression standpoint, again, I would say pretty positive. All the pros and cons, the double-edged swords, all come out to be this is a pretty fun experience. I think there's a lot of depth to plumb here, um, and it makes some alternative games like World at War, which I think is a more fair comparison than to World in Flames. Honestly, I think this probably blows a World at War out of the water, and that's even considering that a World at War has the 1935 prequel games, The Gathering Storm and A Storm Over Asia, where you can try to have a kind of ahistorical start to World War II. Well, Axis Empire kind of cover Axis Empires covers that two different ways. They have the scenario starting in 1937, which do provide you some latitude to change things. With the cards, you can change a lot of things, and you don't necessarily get a lot more from from starting in 35 versus 37. And if you really wanted to mix things up, then again, that dice of decision stuff can really provide even more latitude there. So I look at all this and I say, well, easy peasy, this beats out a World at War a lot to me. I mean, just very very easy to say that, and it's maybe not. It shouldn't even be compared to World in Flames because I think World in Flames is doing a different sort of thing than this game is aiming to achieve. They really have different design goals. I feel like so. They're only being. I can only compare them in the fact that they're strategic World War II games. So, all that to say, right? I think I have a very positive outlook on Axis Empires. I think I was a little, I don't know, pessimistic or trying to stay neutral. And as I've gotten to play, I definitely I can see better how things are implemented and the way they work together, and they provide a very specific experience that I think can be very positive and a lot of fun, and certainly easier to maybe get to the table with newbies than World in Flames can be, or even a World at War. I feel like you could probably, if I were like to hand teach this to somebody like at a table, sit down and talk about how the game works, I could probably relay that quickly enough that we could play the game pretty fast. And I think that's really important. That would be the non-shifts Krieg, non-dice of decision stuff. You're just trying to play the game. I think that could be very easy to get rolling and teach somebody these things now that I've got them a bit baked into my brain, the mechanics, how things work, what's the definition, how do you actually count supply, all that's gelling pretty good, and I feel like I can relay that information to another person, which really means like that it was good. The knowledge transfer of the game to my brain has worked well. So anyway, for those who've been sticking with the series, let me know what your thoughts are on my thoughts if you're watching this whole thing. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you feel like maybe I've mischaracterized something and you want to contest that? I'd be interested to hear as well. Again, at the end of the day, I think any criticisms I have of the game can be very, you can compartmentalize it and say, well, that's just part and parcel of the game, but what the game does well, it does it pretty darn well. We still need to try some other things. We need to tackle more effects of strategic warfare and how all of those things will mix together in a campaign context. So all of this is I suppose, still in the preliminary training scenario mindset. But as we start getting into the broader campaigns, my opinions may change. Who knows? So don't be surprised if sometime from now, after I've completed more videos, I do if not a review, some other sort of closing conclusions on this. But initial impressions, generally good. So anyway, I keep talking, too much talking. All right, guys. Hope you liked this video. Hope it was interesting to hear my thoughts. Everyone's got an opinion, so maybe sitting around for an hour to hear about this isn't exactly the best use of your time. I don't know, but if it was entertaining, let me know. And we will look to tackle the Great Crusade. I think is going to be the next scenario to be played here in the somewhat near future. I should be able to set up a lot of that pretty quickly, I hope. The one challenge being it is one of those scenarios where you're deep in the war, so I have to kind of sort through a lot of counters to find the stuff that I really need. So that may take me a little bit longer to get set up. But when we do, we'll play through that, and then we'll figure things out from there. I do have an itch to get Dicenzo out of the box proper, um, but I want to get through a little bit more Europe stuff and feel really comfortable with all of that before I move on. So see you in the next one, guys. Take care. Keep gaming.